Hello everyone, I'm back. What a week for PlayStation fans it was, man. Holy shit. First we started off, of course, with that state of play. Most importantly of all, the Death Stranding 2 trailer, which I gotta talk about, you already know. And then it was just a day or two ago that we also got news out of Naughty Dog, very unexpectedly so, when they released their Grounded 2 documentary for The Last of Us Part 2. Where they basically talked about the future of the Last of Us series, and there's a lot for us to dive into there as well. So that's exactly what I will, of course, be doing in this video. Without further ado, I'd say let's just get started. Yeah, so Death Stranding 2, man, where do I even begin? It's the kind of game that gets me to be excited about this medium again. You all know that I've been kind of struggling, you know, getting back into gaming. I've been on and off with my activity on this channel, and that's all for the reason that everything just kind of has been feeling the same for me for years on end already, right? Death Stranding is one of those series that's an exception to the rule. It's exactly what makes me feel alive again. You know, I don't wanna make it sound extreme or something, but the sheer creativity that Kojima keeps showing over and over again with his games is something that genuinely just makes me happy. And I don't even, funnily enough, think that Death Stranding 2, from what we've been seeing as far as the game itself goes, it's not that different from the first game. Like, they're doing some teasing here and there regarding possible changes that will be happening to the gameplay. For example, there's a line that Higgs says to Sam about, oh, I see you've traded in a rope for a stick this time around, which seems to imply that yes, there's going to actually be a bit more of an emphasis on combat this time around. But then when you actually look at the trailer in itself, there is nothing there that actually tells us that. All that we keep seeing as far as gameplay goes is just once more footage of Sam walking around the most bizarre, insanely good-looking environments, of course, with a lot of variety, a lot more variety than we definitely saw in the first game, I will say, when you look at the desert, when you look at the part up close to a moon or whatever the hell it is. I don't even know how to, you know, what to think about it. Rock formations. The game seems to be hinting that Mexico will at least be one of the locations already. I think that the way Fragile talks about it is that at that point they've already covered Mexico, but it's probably an earlier point in the game that we simply didn't see in this trailer. But some of the environments we saw might have actually been there. It could as well, of course, be the case that we'll be covering Mexico as well as South America, and then maybe even go all around the globe, right? Exploring a bunch of different continents. The whole ship that they keep using is called the Magellan, and Magellan was an explorer who actually circumnavigated the entire globe. I think he was the very first person to do it. So, judging based on that, it's very possible that this game is going to be taking us, like I said, around the entire globe, and so we'll be getting a lot of variety in terms of locations and stuff. A lot of things to be excited about there, right? But like I said, in terms of sheer gameplay, we're still seeing Sam, for the most part, delivering a bunch of packages, doing so while walking, and that's not necessarily anything new. I've always, I will say this, advocated that people calling Death Stranding a walking simulator isn't necessarily justified because the traversal in the game is so fleshed out. The traversal in Death Stranding always was on a whole different level compared to any other game out there that would usually be called a walking simulator. Whether it is in the types of equipment that you'll find yourself using, whether it is in the way that you're building zipline networks, you're using vehicles, of course, every now and then as well. You're taking on several loads of packages from one station while delivering them, you know, basically across several substations all at the same time. There's a lot of depth to that particular gameplay loop. There's, of course, stealth sections where you're evading BTs and stuff. There is some combat here and there as well, although I will say there was too little of it in the original game. And also, it didn't always play the best. That's the other point I guess I should be making, is that we even see a little glimpse once more of Sam just very awkwardly evading a boss fight encounter, which is exactly what I hated about the first game. Those boss fights just weren't very satisfying to play. And so, I mean, here I am already kind of getting into the critiques, but most of it is still unfounded, I guess, or at least it's basically baseless speculation, just looking at the few minutes of footage that we actually did get so far. I don't necessarily see much new stuff in this trailer yet. But what gets me so excited, what gets me to feel so happy watching something like this, is the sheer creativity that I talked about at display. You know, Kojima with his crazy design ideas. We see Fragile with a face mask that's basically comprised of hands, which, when you really do think about it, is also going to have some type of functional use. Back in the first game, when you were trying to avoid those BTs, you had to be holding your breath and stuff, right? That's what the main character would constantly be doing. And usually, I think you were supposed to hold L2 and R2 on the controller to actually get him to do that stuff. Now, this will basically allow him to automatically have his mouth covered by, you know, this new piece of equipment, I guess, that we have, which means you're gonna have your hands free for, yeah, potential combat, for example, that will start actually getting featured a whole lot more in the game. But again, we'll simply have to wait and see about that. Other than that, of course, there's a little puppet that comes along with you who, at first, I wasn't really sure how I was feeling about it. The comparisons that you can make to Mimir in God of War are easily made, but at the same time, by the second scene, he already grew on me when he was actually giving shit to Higgs, of course, by saying, where the fuck is the rest of your band, or whatever the hell that he told him with his pathetic electric guitar. And oh my god, that scene alone. You know, as much as I feel like Troy Baker has been featured in way too many games, Higgs is a fantastic character. He already was in the first game, and seeing him back now with his new style, crazy, you know, Joker-type face paint. Actually, apparently it's more based on like a movie called The Crow or something, I think is what people said, which is a movie I haven't seen. So again, I think there it's like, yeah, easy to just think of a character like the Joker instead, because that's somebody who everybody will know about. But when he pulls out that guitar, starts just attacking enemies with it, right? The music is kicking in. It's so well edited. It's just Kojima's games, I can't understate this, and I don't want to come across as a fanboy or something, but they are on a whole different level compared to anything else out there. And I feel like that's just a fact. You know, the state of play was very much worth the watch. We saw a bunch of games that were looking pretty good, but I think the big thing that separates a game like Death Stranding 2 compared to all the other games that we saw earlier on in the showcase is that all those games seem like kind of derivatives from franchises we've already played millions of installments in before. Rise of the Ronin is the perfect example. I think that one directly preceded the Death Stranding trailer, and it's a game that mechanically seems incredibly sound, but at the same time I can't help but look at it and just see, oh look, it's inspired by Assassin's Creed, Spider-Man, Ghost of Tsushima. You've got a combat system very much akin to Sekiro. It's just another clone of the same old games we've been playing over and over again. And this is why Kojima is simply doing something else for me compared to all these other developers, is he's doing his own thing. And I cannot stress out enough that gameplay-wise, he actually still has to convince me, even if I liked the gameplay in the first game myself. I wasn't one of those haters that called the game a walking simulator, and like, I love delivering those packages for 70 plus hour or however much time I think I ended up putting into the game, got the platinum trophy and everything. And if we're gonna be doing that all over again, just yet another time in Death Stranding 2, I'll be down for that, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, you know, I would like to see more gameplay improvements. I would like to see the combat refined, the boss fights improved upon. None of that has actually been shown to me yet, but it's just the small creative ways, the character designs, the attention to detail, the way that a trailer like this is edited, the music that's featured in it, all of it makes it such an entertaining package. Like, I was constantly thinking about that line from the Gladiator movie, I think it was, right? Are you not entertained? Because that's what games should be at the end of the day. They should be about entertainment. And you can choose to want to hate on the game instead. You can choose to call it weird, to not want to understand any of it. I see a lot of people, unfortunately, that remain kind of, how I look at it, close-minded. You know, they just don't want to open themselves up to something like this because they want everything to make sense. They want everything to feel grounded in reality. That's just not the type of game that Death Stranding is going to be. There's a lot of realistic elements to it, but Kojima has always been known for the quirkiness. Even when you go back to the Metal Gear Solid games, we've had I would say a grand total of 5, but it's been many more when you consider all the spin-offs, of course, as well. But Metal Gear Solid made it clear from the jump that on one hand it could be an incredibly serious, action-packed espionage game with, you know, humanized characters, but simultaneously you'd be running into these crazy supernatural bosses with the most insane lines of dialogue. Eventually you just accept it for what it is, right? And you learn to actually appreciate it instead. And I think this is exactly anybody who is gonna be allowing themselves to open up to this kind of experience will ultimately walk away super satisfied. They'll walk away with a smile on their face, exactly like I did, and I know for a fact many of you did. It's a shame, if you'd ask me, but you know, it's everybody's own individual choice. Seeing still, unfortunately, a couple of people in the YouTube scene that I personally follow who are not really able or opening themselves up to do that, yeah, it's a shame, but you know, ultimately, you've only got yourself to blame. You're only robbing yourself from what is no doubt going to be an incredibly unique experience that I can't wait to play in 2025. I was thinking about that release year, by the way, as well. It's surprising how Kojima was able to finish the first Death Stranding game so quickly following his departure from Konami. As you might remember, Metal Gear Solid 5 came out in 2015, the end of 2015. That's when Kojima left the company. It was E3 2016 that he originally announced Death Stranding, and they had just started building up that team. They had just started using Guerrilla's Decima engine to actually be able to build it. But the game came out in 2019. That was the surprising part. They were so, for as grand in scale as the game actually ended up being, it was genuinely shocking how quickly they managed to wrap it all up. This being a sequel, you would expect that development time would be much less long, but that being said, it's gonna be a good 5 to 6 years until we now get to see the sequel. Now that's of course because Kojima is simultaneously working on other projects as well. There is the OD game that he's working on for Xbox, which I think is supposed to be smaller scaled. There is also, of course, the new espionage IP that is already announced that's going to be in the vein, I guess, of Metal Gear Solid, which I'll no doubt be looking forward to, of course. But that's going to be coming up next. You know, they've done some pre-production work on that, judging by what Kojima has said, but nothing really concrete yet. That's only going to start once Death Stranding 2 gets wrapped up. But yeah, like I said, they'll be needing a good 5 to 6 years, taking Death Stranding 1's release date as a starting point up until the moment Death Stranding 2 releases. And that's surprising. And I think what that has to do with is the fact that Kojima initially did want to make something else, right? And this is the project that he had talked about that ended up actually getting cancelled, most likely because PlayStation or whatever, you know, studio that, or sorry, company that he was working with just didn't want to greenlight it, didn't see the potential in that idea. That's a shame because I do want most of all for Kojima to remain creative and to simply do what he feels like doing. You know, I genuinely wonder if PlayStation did not pressure him a little bit too much to make that espionage game just because they know people are going to be a bit more down for it, I guess, right? Because of the criticism that Death Stranding does receive most of the time about not being action-packed enough. But all of that, once more, just remains speculation from my end, judging by the little information that we do get. Now, speaking of letting go of your grievances, speaking of trying to always remain open, I guess, to future possibilities, we gotta talk about the news surrounding The Last of Us Part 3. I guess a potential scenario for what Part 3 could in fact be about. Yeah, Neil Druckmann talked a little bit about it, made a surprising announcement at the end of the Grounded 2 documentary that Naughty Dog released just a few days ago. I didn't watch the full thing, by the way. I gotta be entirely upfront about that. It's a full 2-hour-long video. I watched the first 20 minutes and the last 20 minutes, so it's obviously describing the entire road of the development of The Last of Us Part 2, from the way it started, the concepts that they had, straight coming off of the very first game, Neil Druckmann getting sort of distracted, of course, with Uncharted 4 and everything that happened there. Yeah, and then basically to what caused them to make the decisions that they did regarding the story and the gameplay. There's the whole 2-hour video you can go and check out for yourself if you want to. By the end, they talk a little bit about crunch as well at the studio and what they've done to try and avoid that in the future now. As well as they talk about the leaks, of course, that we saw come out for the game just a few months before the release date. One thing that I found interesting there is that they mentioned that the guy ultimately responsible for those leaks turned out to be a Dutch guy in his 20s, which I'm not gonna lie, but made me feel a little bit uneasy at first, thinking, oh god, I hope I wasn't on the suspect list when they found out about this at first. But that being said, there is a small, literally 1-minute clip of Neil Druckmann at the very end talking about what the future prospect for The Last of Us right now looks like. And surprisingly enough, he actually did say that a concept that they had already in mind early on about a potential future for the series involving Tommy, apparently, they've started thinking a little bit more about. And so now the concept has gotten a whole lot more concrete. And Neil Druckmann, from what he said, of course, it's not flat out confirmation that, you know, the game did by no means get announced or whatever the hell, but he did indicate that there's truly a large chance they're going to pursue it and we're going to eventually see it completed. Now, I will say they also managed to string us along for a good 4 years after announcing that The Last of Us 2 would not include multiplayer, but that we would eventually see the fruits of their labor when it came to all that work. We've seen what happened there when it came to factions, right, in recent months, now that they've actually announced that the game did outright get cancelled after it all. Naughty Dog is so good at spinning particular narratives. Even when the announcement came in that Factions was ultimately cancelled, I think it was a month or two ago, right, that happened, they basically said, like, okay, guys, it's very simple, you've got a choice. Either you want us to complete this Factions game, however, we're gonna need to focus on it for years on end to keep it alive because it's going to be a live service project, or we're gonna continue making single player games, which is of course what you all want most. So ultimately it's a good thing that we actually had to cancel this game, whereas they're totally not taking responsibility for the fact that it's they who weren't able to understand what a live service game would ultimately entail, and having literally wasted years of work on this project trying to get it off the ground. That being said, are we going to see this Tommy Last of Us 3 ultimately being made? I would not rule it out in the slightest. I think it's interesting, though, that the way Neil Druckmann talks about it right now, it does seem like this is still an idea that they have, but not something that they've been actively working on necessarily, which does actually tell us it's more likely that we'll see a new IP come out from them instead next up. The question, of course, remains, when exactly are we going to even see that new IP or new game or whatever it's going to be in the first place, because it's been a good 4 years since The Last of Us Part 2 came out, and we still haven't heard from Naughty Dog in the slightest. Again, their Factions game, that's the only thing we've been hearing about, actually got cancelled, and other than that, we have a good 43 different remakes, I think, that came out, and a TV show, but... That being said, if you'd ask me, what do I actually think of this idea? I think it's a pretty good idea. I also think in a certain way you could actually see it as Naughty Dog admitting defeat, because this is the safest idea that you could have gone with to keep everybody happy across the board, whether it's Part 2 fans or people that only liked the first game and weren't really fond of the direction Part 2 was taking. Well, how are you going to get those people back? By simply falling back on that nostalgia, falling back on those connections from the first game. If Tommy stars as the main lead, we may very well get a bunch more flashbacks involving Joel and seeing what they were up to in those 20 years leading up to the start of the first game. When you look at The Last of Us Part 2 and how it ended, following Tommy is not the natural direction for it to be heading into. Last of Us Part 2 ended with Abby and Lev making it to a shore somewhere in California, I think it was, right? The destination that they were trying to reach. The question is, what would have happened to them next? Ellie, of course, managed to lose everyone around her. What was her next step going to be? Yes, Tommy did want to go after Abby still, basically wanted to continue the cycle of violence, I guess. But you also got to keep in mind, Tommy was literally shot in the back of his head. Tommy was limping. The dude could hardly walk anymore. How are we going to make him our protagonist now, following up from all this? I don't really see that, unless of course he magically manages to recover a few months down the road, which I don't think that would really be possible. He already did go through a lot of recovery when we saw him limping like that, but again, I'm sure they'll make it work. The only thing that I mean to say is that when I think about, okay, what's the direction Naughty Dog would have personally wanted to take a next Last of Us game in, I don't think it necessarily would have been this one. I don't think they would have wanted to make Tommy suddenly our protagonist or something like that. I think that while they would never admit to it, you know, secretly this absolutely is also a business move that they are making here. This is the only viable direction the story could have gone into for everybody to still be on board with it, for interest to be regained when it comes to this Last of Us Part 3 game, and it's also a way for them to tie all the other characters still back in with the whole narrative. I have no doubt in my mind we are actually still going to be seeing Abby and Lev back. Maybe they'll not as heavily promote them or something, but they'll be a part of this story. Ellie will be too. Maybe as Ellie is actually going after Tommy to stop him from doing what he was going to do. I mean, basically Ellie was following him up at first, right? Because Tommy was the one who wanted to take revenge by himself. Ellie went a couple of days or weeks or whatever it was later by herself, chose not to do it in the end. Maybe now she's gonna try actually stop Tommy from continuing that pursuit. They'll automatically be running into Abby. She's gonna be a part of the story. They might not as heavily market it, like I said. They might more market the Tommy flashbacks and the other side of the story that is no doubt going to play a larger role. But I think ultimately this is the best move they probably could have made to, you know, I mean, not to repair the franchise or to fix the damage that they did. I don't want to word it that dramatically, but I do think they lost part of their audience when it comes to Part 2, and this is the only way that they could possibly get some of those people back. So it's a smart move. It's, yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see exactly what the details are ultimately going to be when we're going to be seeing this game, but that might still be years down the road. So for now, I don't think there's really much more to go on. We're going to see what the future for Naughty Dog holds, especially now that Factions got cancelled. What's this other project they've been working on in the meantime? When are we finally going to be seeing it? Even that could still be a year or two away. And, you know, by the time they announce it, it might still be another year or two until we actually see it come out. So game development, it's a slow process. It's become slower and slower over time, the bigger that these games have gotten as well. So for now, really, I mean, I think that's all that I can say about it. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed all my thoughts here about Death Stranding, about The Last of Us. Let me know how you feel about all these topics. Let me know what you thought about the state of play. Let me know what you think about the current status when it comes to PlayStation games, when it comes to Kojima and Naughty Dog, all that stuff. Don't forget, of course, to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. And then hopefully I'll be back very soon in this channel again with another video if we do get some exciting news to talk about. So I'll see you then.